I'm delighted to be joined here this morning by our distinguished guest. John Kennedy said it best of the AFL-CIO. They are the people's lobby. And Rich Trumka continues in that same vein, lobbying on behalf of all American people and especially its workforce. We're joined also by our distinguished ranking member and leader on the Labor and Education Committee, and George Miller, our budget chief, and doing an extraordinary job, and Chris Van Hollen, and of course, our vice chair, Javier Becerra. Look, let me just set the table again for what's happening, and you're going to hear from our leadership with respect to that. We saw it out in Wisconsin. We saw it very clearly that a governor comes in and says that it's really all about the deficits and their focus on the deficit. But in truth, when you peel away the veneer, what was it about? About ending collective bargaining and going after workers. And here in Washington, D.C., we hear much about how it's all about the deficit and getting this deficit under control. But really, truly, what is it about? It's about ending Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid as we know it. This persistent attack of going after programs that hurt the least amongst us. Our budget reflects our values, and those values do not include balancing a budget on the backs of the disabled veterans, on the backs of students trying to attain their college education, on the backs of the elderly seeking their medical care that they need. That's the difference between the two parties. They seem to steer away from all the high costs and revenues and profits that are being made on the outside. Thank God for the Sisters of Notre Dame de Mur, who said yesterday that they wanted to challenge Goldman Sachs and the corporate dispensing of these profits in the midst of this deep recession with so many Americans out of work. Someone I know the Sisters of Notre Dame would be very proud of would be Rich Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, the People's Lobby.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it very much. I have the honor this morning to be talking to the caucus, and we're going to be talking about the overreaching of governors like Scott Walker in Wisconsin and the overreaching of state legislators like John Kasich and the Ohio State Legislature, where in a very corrupt way they not only assaulted collective bargaining, but they're assaulting democracy. If you look at what's happening across the country. In Ohio, for instance, during the middle of a committee meeting, they didn't have enough votes to pass the bill. So they removed a Republican senator during the vote and replaced him with another senator. In Wisconsin, they did this bill in the middle of the night. First, it was about the deficit, and as Representative Larson said, we peeled that away. And it wasn't about that at all. It was about destroying the means for working people to get into the middle class. Well, what they hadn't counted on was the backlash that would result from all of that. The governor's polls in Wisconsin have been dropping like a heavy rock in a shallow pool. He went from 60-some%, he's down into the low 30s right now. And he continues to drop because the American public elected these people to create jobs. And they're doing anything but creating jobs. In fact, they're destroying good middle-class producing jobs. And so we'll talk about that today, and we'll talk about the importance of collective bargaining. Collective bargaining as part of the solution to the situation that the country finds itself in. And we'll also be talking about an alternative vision. The Republicans tell us right now, we can't afford good jobs. We can't afford a secure retirement. We can't afford any of the things that make up the the American dream. Scale your expectations back. The American dream can't be enacted or achieved by Americans anymore. And we want to take a very serious issue with that and offer an alternative vision where the American dream not only can be achieved, but can actually grow and prosper and be the dream and the envy of everybody in the world. So we're going to have an interesting morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate.
George?
Well, we're delighted to have President Trumka come before the caucus because I think that he brings together for the Democratic Caucus a confluence of issues that we will be confronting over the next few days. First of all, this is the 14th week, and we see no job creation legislation coming from the Republicans. We see no effort to address the 6 million people who are long-term unemployed. But what we do see is reducing and getting rid of their ability to have job training, to learn new skills, to take new occupations as they try to re-enter the market force. And what we see later with the introduction of their budget, of course, is the undermining the economic security of the middle class. 16 million senior citizens are put at risk with their Medicaid cuts or their block grant. We see millions of retiring Americans losing the economic security of having Medicare for them when they need it. And this is not a budget that addresses the needs and the priorities of middle America. And it's very important that this caucus come together around those issues. And it's very important that this caucus come together around the issues to make sure that we continue to secure the rights of American workers to collectively bargain. In the private sector and in the public sector, there is no difference. When they take the rights away from one of them, they take it away from all of us. And it's important that we understand that that's the case. It's important that we understand that when teachers bargain, they bargain on behalf of our children, on behalf of their capabilities to learn, on behalf of their capabilities to enter a school and to remain safe. When nurses bargain, they bargain on behalf of patient care. They bargain on reducing mistakes and reducing illnesses in hospitals. They bargain on patient load. They bargain on the care of our family members. And so it's important that Americans understand that it just isn't a question about destroying the public sector bargaining rights. They're coming for those bargaining rights, as we see with the anti-labor amendments. Each and every time they bring a bill to the floor, once again, they're attacking job training, job safety, and here we are 1 year later after the Big Branch mine explosion, and they still refuse to bring mine safety legislation to the floor. We're looking at the most anti-middle class, anti-worker Republican caucus in my memory in this Congress. And they're here to assault those rights of middle Americans to have a secure economic future, and we've got to turn them back. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to join my colleagues in thanking Rich Trumka for his terrific leadership. I'm also very proud to have him as a constituent in Maryland's 8th District. And as he and Chairman John Larson said, what's happening in Wisconsin and some of the Midwest states is you see Republican governors using the fragile economic situation and the deficit as a pretext for going after working Americans, whether they're teachers, firefighters, policemen, because at the same time they're making those cuts, they are providing tax breaks to special corporate interests in all those states. And what we're seeing here in Washington, D.C. is exactly the same thing. Yes, we have to reduce our deficits and debt. There's agreement on that. The question is, how do you do that? And even though it's dressed up with a lot of sunny rhetoric about reform, the fact is that the Republican budget that will be presented in full a little later today, we know will just be the same rigid ideological agenda that we've seen in the past. It will provide tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans and the most powerful at the expense of the rest of America. It's going to provide added tax breaks for the wealthiest, beyond even the skewed system right now in favor of the very wealthy. And at the same time, it will keep in place taxpayer subsidies for the oil and gas industry. Everyone knows that prices at the pump are way up high, profits are soaring, and yet they refuse to make that choice. So instead of asking those special interests to pay their share, they're going to cut our kids' education investment. They're going to cut our research into cures and treatments for cancer and other diseases. They're going to cut basic investments we need to make in infrastructure and clean energy and the things that we need to do to make this country strong. And they're going to dismantle the Medicare guarantee. They're going to require senior citizens now to go into the private insurance market And they're on their own there with a voucher, whatever you want to call it, that will decline in value. And they're going to shift the entire risk of rising health care costs to seniors. That's what their plan does. And how do they help pay for that? They're asking seniors to pay for those tax breaks to folks at the very top. That is not the choice that most Americans would make. So yes, we need to reduce the deficits, but we need to do it in a balanced and responsible manner. And again, what we've seen dressed up again in a lot of nice sounding language is the same old tired agenda we've seen before. Tax breaks for the very wealthy at the expense of the rest of the country. Let's tackle our deficits in a way that makes America proud. And with that, let me turn it over to our Vice Chairman of the caucus, Javier Becerra.
Thanks, Chris. Well, day 91, and rather than have an initiative that will continue the progress that's been made in the last 2 months of over 500,000 private sector jobs created, instead Republicans are proposing, once again, a budget that will eliminate hundreds of thousands of jobs and certainly change the character of the most precious programs that we've seen in America for our seniors in quite some time. We want to welcome President Richard Trumka to the House of Representatives because he knows what it means to represent working men and women throughout this country. And so at a time when Republicans are cheering the Speaker of the House of Representatives for his warning to the House Administration Committee that the House should start to make preparations to shut down the government, and in response to notifying his Republican conference that he had advised the House Administration Committee of that potential shutdown, he receives a standing ovation from his Republican colleagues. We are here talking to a man who is trying to defend working Americans. This war on workers has to stop. Unfortunately, it looks like today, with the introduction of the Republican 2012 budget proposal, it looks like this war on workers will now add a second front, and it will add a war on seniors. Because to eliminate Medicare and Medicaid and put in its place a voucherized system, a private voucherized system which guarantees seniors nothing, is nothing more than a war on seniors. It returns seniors back to the days before the 1930s, before the 1960s, when most seniors retired into poverty. And so we're here to say that it's time for us to stand up for not only for working men and women, but the seniors of America. Coupon care, which is essentially what the Republicans would turn Medicare into, coupon care is not where we should take our seniors. And finally, it's really interesting. If you look back a couple of months, there's an article that you can easily pull up. $32 billion in budget cuts proposed. That was at the beginning of February. That was the level of budget cuts that were proposed by Republicans in the beginning of February for the remainder of the 2011 budget, for the CR. Apparently, the Republicans this week have rejected $33 billion in budget cuts that were put on the table by the White House and Democrats. And so today on the table is sitting a proposal that was more in cuts to spending than what the Republicans first proposed in their own budget proposal for 2011. Now they've rejected, evidently, that proposal for $33 billion in cuts and want more. Essentially, I think what they're saying is they want to shut down the government. But what we can see is that there is an unwillingness to bargain in good faith. And whether it's working with American workers, working with America's seniors, or working with policymakers in Washington, D.C., Republicans have decided they'd rather do it only their way and put not just the government at risk of a shutdown, but the American people and all the services they depend on at risk. So we're here to talk about putting Americans back to work with Richard Trumka. We're not here to talk about creating a war against America's workers. With that, I think we're ready for the questions, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, later this week we'll have a rollout on Make It in America, led by our whip, Steny Hoyer, where we do focus on the jobs that need to be created here in America, made in America. And with that, let us take questions that you have.
The Republicans are going to put out another CR. We $12 billion last time Democrats keyed in bringing their CR across the finish line. Is that something you guys think you'll do again?
Well, we'll have all the members speak, but I continue to believe that this is death by 1,000 slashes. And it depends, as Chris Van Hollen says, when you take a look at this, where are their values? Or what are they cutting? You know, and that will determine, I think, how Democrats vote on this specific CR. Obviously, we feel it's in everyone's interest to keep government open and performing. But we won't continue to see death by 1,000 slashes as we go through this charade and puppetry orchestrated by the Tea Party as to whether or not there's going to be any kind of a budget resolution this year, or we just continue these week-to-week sojourns. Anyone else want to? Chris, did you want to?
I would, as the chairman said, what we're seeing is that the Tea Party has hijacked the Republican caucus, because as Javier pointed out, the fact is that the Speaker of the House and the other Republican leaders in the House put on the table a proposal to cut $32 billion in additional funds. Mind you, that's on top of the about $40 billion cuts that had already been made last December when the Democrats were in charge of the House. So they put on the table another $33 billion of cuts. Now they're rejecting their own proposal with respect to the top number. Why are they doing that? Because they are being run now by the Tea Party element of the caucus. And the Tea Party position is it's 100% our way or we shut down the government. And as our Vice Chairman said, you heard cheers this morning. That was reported when Speaker Boehner informed his caucus that they were going to be shutting down the government. Mind you that in addition to saying that $33 billion is not enough, they're saying that you have to make the cuts we want. Now, if you're interested in deficit reduction, it really shouldn't matter whether you save a dollar by cutting education, which they're proposing to do, or whether you save a dollar by taking a dollar's worth of subsidy away from the big oil companies. They both accomplish deficit reduction. But they don't want to talk about that. They just want to talk about the narrow band of cuts they proposed, many of which are designed more to drive a right-wing social agenda than to get at deficit reduction. Otherwise, they put all this stuff on the table. They don't want to talk about it. So bottom line is that it looks like the Republican leadership has been totally taken over, lock, stock, and barrel, by the right-wing Tea Party elements who have said it's our way or shut down the government.
Would you support another short-term CR?
I'd have to look and see what was in the CR. I don't know if they're going to comply with their 72-hour rule or not, but we're interested in seeing what they've got.
Republicans' response to Democrats' criticism of Ryan's budget so far is, where is the Democrats' plan to tackle entitlement reform? Where is the Democrats' plan to cut at least $4.4 trillion from the budget?
Well,
how do you think Democrats should respond to that, including the president?
let me say a couple things. Number one is we will have a Democratic alternative budget. It will achieve significant deficit reduction. We'll talk more about that later. On entitlement reform, by repealing the health care reform bill, by repealing the Affordable Care Act, what the Republican budget does is put a dagger into many of the very important health reforms that were passed. Now, we don't know yet whether, in fact, they're going to continue some of the reforms that we made in Medicare that helped put that program on a more sustainable basis, the ones that they ran ads against all our members about. Remember, in the last election, Republicans in congressional district after congressional district attacked Democratic candidates for some of the Medicare reform measures they took. So this is the height of hypocrisy now to turn around and say, you guys haven't done Medicare reform. Now, it may also be the case that they use some of those Medicare reforms as part of their own plan, the same reforms they attacked. We're going to have to look at that. So the bottom line here is that the Affordable Care Act actually has significant cost savings to Medicare. The difference is we don't put the burden on seniors. We don't eliminate the guarantee that Medicare provides to seniors. We don't throw seniors over into the private insurance market with a voucher that declines in value. Instead, we made reforms that help bend the curve without doing that. So that's going to be the debate going forward.
There's nothing more sacred for the Republicans than making sure that they protect wealth, and nothing they're more easily and feel comfortable about getting rid of than the poorest amongst us. Look, things haven't changed. Let's pull the veneer off of this. This is a Grover Norquist budget. They talk about compromise, but their goal is to shrink government up so small they can drown it in a bathtub. That's what they say repeatedly. That's what they're out to do. This isn't about compromise. This is about an all-out assault on programs, from everything from working people and their labor rights to the very programs that have been the most successful in this country, Social Security and Medicare. And for what purpose? To spare the nation's wealthiest 1% from having to step up to the plate when the only people in America who are sacrificing today are the men and women who wear the uniform, and to balance their pain and the deficits that have been run up there, we're going to get it off the backs of the elderly? That's wrong. And that's a big difference in the values between our two parties. And that's why Democrats will understand the need to make sure that we have to deal with the deficit, but do it in terms of the values that we stand for and protecting those that we're sworn to serve. It is not simply about shareholders. It's about we, the people of the United States, under this Constitution, and that's our responsibility.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, if you distill this to its basics, we found $500 billion in savings in Medicare. I don't think anyone has to question that, and if you don't believe us, talk to the Congressional Budget Office. It's $500 billion in savings, and at the same time we protected Medicare benefits in those $500 billion in savings. In fact, we were able to still find a way to increase benefits for seniors by providing them with preventative care without copay, and by eliminating, in a number of years, the donut hole that Republicans created in their prescription drug medication. $500 billion. Put that on the ledger. Republicans, on the other hand, say they're going to reform the system. So far, all we've found is that they've decided to dismantle Medicare and Medicaid. And if that's the way they want to find savings, they're putting it on the backs of seniors. It's no different from when you distill this discussion about the 2011 budget fight that remains for the CR. Democrats put forward $41 billion of cuts. That's not in question. Talk to the CBO. It's in the books. $41 billion were saved back in December when Democrats voted. Only one Republican voted for that budget. Republicans wanted to do $32 billion additional in February. They've now rejected $33 billion in cuts this week. And now they're cheering because this would take us to a government shutdown. If you distill this to its essence, you can see the game playing, the game of chicken that the far right has begun to play. Perhaps the best thing for the president and Democratic leaders to do is not speak to the speaker to negotiate. It should be speaking to the Tea Party to negotiate, because that's when you can get true negotiation, because it doesn't look like anyone in the House leadership is prepared to fulfill an obligation to live by a bargain to come up with a deal.
Thank you.